Altman Lighting presents Genesis.
The mantra light allows you to record the look on stage and save it as a memory for later playback. So we'll bring up some faders on stage now. And if I wish to save this as my first cue, I press my record button and any one of the flashing playback buttons down the bottom. If I now bring my yellow faders down, when I bring up my red fader, it fades up that playback with a 2-second fade time, and bringing it down fades it out. I'm now going to create a different cue onto fader number 3. This time I'm going to turn on some of my RGB park hands. I'm going to put a colour in them. And I've still got 2 of my dimmers on as well. And I'm going to record this to my second button, or my second playback. And there's my second cue. And you can record up to 10 different cues across the faders at the bottom. I now bring up fader number 1, and there's my first cue. Bring up fader number 2, and my second cue, and I can fade out cue number 1 to get my different looks. This allows you to simply build a range of cues across your 10 faders if you wish to have a simple show to operate. Once you fill up page 1, you can use the page button here to change to page 2, or page 3, all the way through to page 10. There's also a shortcut that if you hold down the page button and press any of the flash buttons, you can instantly jump to different pages, 6, 3, 1. And you'll see that reflected in the display up here. You'll see the 2 cues we've recorded are both displayed here. If you wish to edit the times on those cues, you can tap on the cue and it brings up our window here where we can do things like adjust the time. So now when I fade up cue number 1, it fades up over 4.1 seconds and fades down over 4.6 seconds. Simply press the mantra button to go back to the home screen when you've finished. For advanced users, you may wish to create a list of cues on a single playback fader, and that's also very simple. Simply bring up the lights for the first cue, press record, pick a spare fader. I'm going to move to the other end so we know where we are, and I record that to fader number 10. Now I'm going to add in the lights for my second cue onto my lectern, and I'll press record again, and I'm going to press the same flash button. And you'll see we now get an option to either overwrite and replace the existing cue, or to add to create a new cue. And you'll see I now have 2 cues in my cue list. I can then add some more lights in, and I'll set the colour on those. And press record, and again I've added another cue to my cue list, so I now have 3 cues. And each step I'm just building up my show. When I've finished, bring down all my yellow faders, run up my cue list, there's my last cue. I tap the go button to go back and play cue number 1. There's my first cue. Tap go again and it plays cue 2, followed by cue 3 and then cue 4. If you wish to edit any of those times, as before we tap the cue edit button, we can then step through the cue list and you can see it showing us which cue we're currently on stage, and we can adjust the times. Select the next cue, and this one I'm going to give a 0 fade time to so it snaps in. And this has all been done live, so as I come back to cue 1 on my list, it'll do the 2-second. Then the next cue uses the slightly longer fade times I've put in, and my cue 3 will snap. So you can easily adjust the times on your cues. You can also jump anywhere to a different cue simply by selecting the cue you wish to do, press the jump button, and the stage immediately jumps to that cue. You can rearrange cues, so if I wish to have cue 2 actually come after cue 3, I select it here and I can move it down the list. So actually now it goes Q1, Q3, Q4, and then Q2. Or I can move it back up again if I wish to go back to the original order. You also have the option to rename your cues. So you can tap inside the Cue Edit window and call it Scene 1, or anything else you wish to call it, and use the Rename button. That means now it appears in this list as Scene 1 rather than just a cue name and number. You can also delete individual cues and duplicate or copy cues. And finally, the Delete Memory button deletes the entire cue list from the console. So be careful. We're now going to create a second cue list, because this time we're going to turn it into a chase after we've finished. So I'm going to bring up my lights on my rear wall, and I'm going to record that as cue list to cue list number 8. There's my first cue. And I'm going to jump in and I'm going to change the colour of them all. Record another cue, add, go in, a different colour, add that, and then I'll do one more colour. And I now have a cue list just like before, that when I run up the fader and press my go button, it will fade through those 4 cues. However, in this case, I'm going to turn it into a chase. So I press the edit button just like before, and we have the same options in my window here for fade times, etc. But I'm now going to press the use as chase button. And you'll see that 2 things happen. My screen controls change, and also my lights on stage start chasing. That is, they automatically step through the cue list at the speed that I set here. And I set that in beats per minute, or BPM. So if I set that speed to 60 beats a minute, the lights will change once a second. And then I have the option of crossfade. At the moment they are crossfading all the time, so they're continually fading through that change every second. If I set it back to 0, they'll hold a static value and then change. And I can adjust my crossfade anywhere in between, so it can be half the time fading and half the time stepping, or whatever value I like to have. You can experiment with that to get a look that works for you. The final thing that we've recently added in version 1.3 is ICPB filtering. So normally a cue list, when you record it, controls every parameter of a light. I for intensity, C for colour, P for position, and B for beam. But I can now edit this. So for instance, this cue list, if I now turn off the colour control, you'll see that no longer is the colour chasing. It is simply stepping through the intensity of the 4 steps. Or if I turn colour back on and turn off intensity, the colour is changing, but there is no actual light on stage. So now if I bring up the actual yellow fader lights, you'll see that the chase is running controlling the colour change, but my intensity has been done live off my yellow faders. So I can use my live faders in conjunction with my playback. My playback is controlling the colour, position and beam, but the intensity, because it's off, is being controlled by my yellow faders. This allows for some very flexible live busking of a show.